You're standing at the airport gate, boarding pass in hand, and your heart is beating just a little faster than it should. You look out the window at the plane and think, what if something goes wrong? But then 20 minutes later, you're in a taxi speeding down the highway at 70 miles an hour, texting your friend, barely thinking about the fact that you're statistically in far more danger right now than you ever were on that plane. So why does the flight feel so much riskier? Welcome to Mind Decoded. I'm Dr. Ann.
And I'm Zach. Dr. Ann, what are we unpacking today?
Today we're talking about something called the availability heuristic. It's one of the most powerful cognitive shortcuts our brains use. And honestly, once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. It's the reason we overestimate the risk of plane crashes, shark attacks, and terrorist incidents, while we completely underestimate the risks of things like car accidents, heart disease, or slipping in the bathtub.
Wait, slipping in the bathtub? Is that actually a real risk?
It is, but we'll get to that. The point is, our brains don't calculate risk based on actual statistics. They calculate it based on how easily something comes to mind, how available it is in our memory, and dramatic, vivid, emotionally intense events. They stick.
Okay, so this is literally about what pops into your head first when you think about danger.
Exactly. And here's the thing. What pops into your head first is often whatever the news media has been showing you most recently or most dramatically.
Right, because if there's a plane crash, it's on every channel for a week. The footage plays over and over. You see the wreckage, the families grieving, the investigation.
And your brain, being the efficient pattern matching machine that it is, goes, oh, this is important. This is something I need to remember. This must be common. And then when you're at the airport, that memory is right there, vivid and emotionally charged, and it feels like a real and present danger.
So my brain is basically confusing this was on TV a lot with this happens a lot.
That is a remarkably accurate summary of the availability heuristic, and it's not just a vague psychological concept. This was actually identified and named by two of the most important researchers in cognitive psychology, Daniel Kahneman and Tversky, back in the early 1970s. Their work on this completely changed how we understand human judgment and decision making. In fact, Kahneman later won the Nobel Prize in economics for this research, which is remarkable because he's a psychologist, not an economist.
A psychologist won the Nobel Prize in economics for studying how our brains take mental shortcuts.
He did. Because it turns out that these cognitive biases don't just affect our personal fears, they affect financial markets, government policy, medical decisions, everything. The availability heuristic is not just a quirk of individual psychology, it shapes entire societies.
Okay, so let's go back to the original research. What exactly did Kahneman and Tversky do to figure this out?
So, in the early 1970s, they ran a series of experiments that were elegantly simple. In one of the most famous ones, they asked participants a question. In the English language, are there more words that start with the letter K or more words that have K as the third letter?
Oh, this is interesting. I feel like I'd immediately think words that start with K, obviously. Kite, kangaroo, kitchen king.
That's exactly what almost everyone thinks. Because it's very easy to mentally search for words that start with K. You just think of the letter and words start popping into your head. But trying to think of words where K is the third letter, that's much harder. Your brain doesn't have a natural search function for third letter is K.
So people assume that if it was easier to think of examples, there must be more of them.
Precisely. And in reality, there are actually far more words with K as the third letter. But because those words aren't as mentally available, they don't come to mind as easily, people dramatically underestimated their frequency. The ease of recall became a substitute for actual data.
Wow. So my brain is basically using how quickly can I think of an example as a shortcut for how common is this thing.
That's the availability heuristic in its purest form. And once Kahneman and Tversky established this principle, they and other researchers started finding it everywhere. People overestimate the frequency of dramatic causes of death, homicides, fires, floods, tornadoes, and significantly underestimate the frequency of less dramatic but far more common causes like diabetes, stroke, or stomach cancer.
Because homicides are on the news all the time, diabetes is not.
Right. And it's not just the news, it's any vivid, emotionally intense experience. If you personally know someone who was in a car accident, you're likely to overestimate how common car accidents are, even if the statistics haven't changed. If you watched a documentary about shark attacks right before a beach vacation, you'll feel a completely irrational level of fear stepping into the water, even though statistically you're more likely to be killed by a falling coconut than a shark.
Wait, is that coconut thing actually true?
There's some debate about the exact numbers, but it points to a real statistical truth. The things we fear most viscerally are rarely the things that actually pose the greatest risk to us. And the reason is the availability heuristic. Vivid, dramatic, emotionally intense images are like mental highlighters. Your brain marks them as important simply because they made you feel something strongly.
Okay, so let me try to apply this to my own life right now. I'm thinking about how I've been feeling lately when I drive versus when I fly. And I realize I check my phone while driving, sometimes I eat while driving. I've definitely driven when I was way too tired, and none of that ever really scared me. But last month I was on a flight and there was turbulence and my heart was racing and I was gripping the armrests and I was thinking, this is it. This is how it ends.
And can you see the availability heuristic at work in that moment?
Absolutely. When I was driving, there was no vivid image in my head of a car crash. I hadn't just seen dramatic news coverage of a highway pileup, but I had seen plane crash movies. I had seen news coverage of aviation disasters. Those images were right there, ready to be recalled the moment the plane started shaking.
And here's the part that really gets me when I think about this research. The real statistical difference is staggering. The lifetime odds of dying in a car accident in the United States are about 1 in 107, the lifetime odds of dying in a plane crash, approximately 1 in 11 million. Let those numbers sit for a moment. 1 in 107 versus 1 in 11 million.
That's not even close. That's orders of magnitude different.
And yet, if you ask people which they're more afraid of, most people will say flying. The fear response is completely inverted from the actual risk. That is the power of the availability heuristic.
So, what's actually happening in my brain when this is going on? Like, is there a specific mechanism?
That's a great question. When we talk about the availability heuristic, we're really talking about two related processes. One is the ease of recall, how quickly and effortlessly an example comes to mind. The other is the vividness of the content, how much emotional weight the memory carries. Both of these pathways feed into what feels true to us.
So, a plane crash is both easy to recall because it's been in the media, and it's emotionally weighty because the images are so dramatic.
Exactly, and researchers have found that when something is both easy to recall and emotionally vivid, our brains essentially bypass the more analytical reasoning systems. The emotional centers of the brain, particularly the amygdala, activate and they essentially shout louder than the prefrontal cortex, which is trying to do the math.
It's like my emotional brain is screaming at the top of its lungs, and my rational brain is trying to politely raise its hand in the back of the room.
That's a really good metaphor. And the emotional brain has a direct line to your stress response system. So when that vivid plane crash footage pops into your head, your body actually starts responding as if you're in danger right now. Increased heart rate, muscle tension, maybe a little sweat. Your rational brain can know the statistics perfectly well, but your body is already responding to the vivid image.
So even if I'm telling myself this is irrational, flying is safe, my body is already in fight or flight mode because of those mental images.
And that's why simply knowing the statistics often isn't enough to calm us down. The availability heuristic operates below the level of conscious reasoning. It's a gut-level phenomenon.
Okay, but here's what I'm wondering. Is this actually a flaw in my brain? Like, is the availability heuristic just a mistake? Because it feels like it must have some evolutionary purpose if it's this powerful.
That's such an important question, and I'm glad you asked it. Because this is where the story gets really interesting. The availability heuristic is not a bug, it's a feature. It's a shortcut that evolved because for most of human history, it worked pretty well.
Explain that. How could it possibly have been useful to be afraid of the wrong things?
Think about our ancestral environment. For most of human evolution, we lived in small groups. There was no mass media, there were no statistics. If you personally witnessed a member of your tribe being attacked by a predator near a certain watering hole, that was crucial survival information. The vividness of that memory and the ease with which you could recall it needed to influence your behavior strongly, because in that environment, a single vivid event genuinely did indicate a real and present danger.
So if I saw one person get eaten by a crocodile, avoiding that river was actually a smart move, even if statistically most people who went there were fine.
Exactly. In a world without data, your personal experiences and the vivid stories you heard from others were the best risk assessment tools available. The problem is that our brains are still running that same ancient software, but now we're in an environment where we're bombarded with vivid, emotionally intense images from all over the world constantly.
Right. My brain didn't evolve to distinguish between this happened to someone I know and this happened to someone on the other side of the planet, and the news is showing it to me 20 times a day.
And that is a profound mismatch. Your brain treats both of those as equally important, equally indicative of danger in your environment. The modern media landscape essentially hijacks an evolved cognitive system that was designed for a very different world.
That actually makes me feel a little better about it. It's not that I'm irrational or broken, it's that my brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. It's just working with completely different inputs than it was designed for.
And look, once you understand the mechanism behind this, you might actually feel more compassion for yourself. Because this isn't a character flaw, it's a brain feature doing its job in a world it wasn't built for. The fear of flying that so many people experience, it's not weakness, it's not irrationality in the clinical sense. It's a perfectly normal cognitive system responding to the vivid, emotionally intense inputs that modern media provides.
And I imagine this doesn't just apply to fear of flying. I'm thinking about other areas of life now. Like, why are people so afraid of terrorist attacks when heart disease kills vastly more people? Why do parents worry about kidnappings when car accidents are a much bigger threat to their kids?
You're exactly right. And this is where the availability heuristic connects to so many other important phenomena. It's why politicians can use vivid anecdotes to sway public opinion, even when the broader data doesn't support their argument. It's why fundraising campaigns for rare diseases often use individual patient stories, because a single vivid story of one suffering child is more emotionally powerful and more memorable than a statistic about millions of people.
So the availability heuristic isn't just about personal fear. It shapes public policy. It shapes what causes get funding. It shapes who people vote for.
Absolutely. And here's a specific example that I find fascinating. After the September 11th attacks in 2001, there was a measurable shift in how Americans traveled. In the months following the attacks, many people chose to drive long distances rather than fly. Researchers later analyzed the data and found something sobering. The increase in highway fatalities during that period, from all those additional cars on the road, actually exceeded the number of people who died on the planes on September 11th.
Wait. So by trying to avoid the thing they feared, people actually put themselves in a statistically more dangerous situation.
Yes, and that is the availability heuristic in action on a massive scale. The images of planes hitting buildings were so vivid, so emotionally overwhelming, so available in everyone's minds that people made decisions based on that fear, decisions that statistically increased their actual risk.
That's devastating, and it makes me think about how often I might be making decisions like that in my own life. Smaller scale, obviously, but the same mechanism.
And that's the invitation this episode is really offering, not to eliminate the availability heuristic because we can't, it's too deeply wired, but to notice it, to pause when you feel a strong fear response and ask yourself, is this danger actually common? Or is it just vivid? Is my brain responding to data, or is it responding to drama?
That's such a useful question. Is my brain responding to data or drama?
It's a good little mantra, and I want to be clear, this doesn't mean you should never feel afraid. Fear is an important signal, but it does mean you can get curious about where that fear is coming from. Is it coming from actual probability, or is it coming from the availability of vivid examples?
Okay, so let me try this out on something. Earlier you mentioned slipping in the bathtub. I'm now genuinely curious, is that actually a significant risk? Because I never think about it.
It is. In the United States, about 24,000 people are injured in bathtubs or showers every year. Many of those are serious, and yet almost no one lies awake at night worrying about their bathtub. There's no dramatic news coverage of bathtub accidents, no blockbuster movies about slipping in the shower. The risk is statistically significant, but it's not cognitively available, so we simply don't register it as dangerous.
Meanwhile, I'm sure plenty of people are afraid of things that are extraordinarily unlikely just because they've seen dramatic portrayals of them.
Exactly. Shark attacks, serial killers, plane crashes, terrorist incidents. The availability heuristic makes these loom large in our minds while genuinely common risks, like bathtub falls or poor diet or texting while driving, barely register.
I feel like this episode is going to change how I watch the news. I can already imagine myself noticing when my brain is mistaking this was on TV for this is likely to happen to me.
That's exactly the awareness we're going for, and here's a practical insight that I think can be genuinely helpful. When you're making a decision that involves risk, whether it's a health decision, a financial decision, a travel decision, deliberately seek out the base rates, the actual statistical probabilities. Don't rely on how easily examples come to mind.
So if I'm nervous about flying, instead of just feeling the fear and letting it drive my decision, I should actually look up the data?
Yes, and I mean really look up the data, not just tell yourself flying is safe, because that abstract statement doesn't compete with the vivid image of a plane crash. You need to give your brain something concrete. For example, I would have to fly every single day for about 29,000 years to be in a fatal plane crash. That's a specific vivid statistic that can actually compete with the vivid fear imagery.
29,000 years. That's okay. That actually does reframe it.
It does, doesn't it? And that's the counter strategy. Meet vivid fear with vivid data. Don't just tell yourself the rational truth. Make it as concrete and tangible as the fear itself.
So this episode is basically a reminder that my brain is an ancient piece of hardware running modern software, and sometimes it just needs a manual override.
That is a perfect way to put it. And the first step of that manual override is simply noticing the availability heuristic when it's happening. When you feel a surge of fear about something, pause, ask yourself, have I recently seen a vivid example of this in the media? Is my judgment being shaped by how easily this comes to mind, rather than by how likely it actually is?
And I imagine that over time, that pause just becomes a habit. You start automatically questioning your own fear responses.
You do, and the research supports this. Studies have shown that simply educating people about the availability heuristic, just making them aware that this bias exists, can reduce its influence on their judgments. It doesn't eliminate it entirely, but it gives people a fighting chance to engage their more analytical thinking.
So this conversation we're having right now is actually part of the solution.
It is. You're welcome.
Okay, but I want to get a little deeper into the mechanism because I think there's something really interesting here. Earlier you mentioned the two pathways, ease of recall and emotional vividness. Are those actually different things in the brain? Like, do they use different neural systems?
They are related but distinct, and that's a really perceptive question. The ease of recall seems to involve more of the prefrontal cortex and the memory retrieval networks. It's about how efficiently your brain can search through stored information. The emotional vividness, on the other hand, involves the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are deeply involved in emotional memory formation and retrieval.
So when a memory is both easy to recall and emotionally intense, it's basically lighting up multiple brain systems at once?
Precisely, and that's why these types of memories are so powerful in shaping our judgments. They're not just intellectual knowledge, they're full-body experiences. When you recall that plane crash footage, you're not just remembering facts, you're re-experiencing the emotional state you were in when you saw it.
And that emotional re-experiencing feels like real danger information. It feels like my body is telling me something important.
Because it is telling you something important, it's telling you that this memory is tagged as significant. The problem is just that the tag was applied by a news editor who decided to run the footage 50 times in 1 week, not by an actual assessment of risk in your environment.
That's such a weird thing to think about. The emotional intensity of my memories is partially just a function of media decisions. Which clips got the most airtime? Which stories the algorithms decided to show me?
And in the age of social media, this effect is amplified. Algorithm optimize for engagement, and the most engaging content is often the most emotionally intense content, which is often the most frightening content. So we're swimming in an information environment that is deliberately designed to make rare dramatic events feel common and immediate.
So I'm not just fighting my own brain's ancient wiring. I'm fighting an entire information ecosystem that's optimized to trigger that wiring.
You are, and that's why awareness is so important. You can't control the information environment, but you can control how you relate to it. You can learn to recognize when your fear response is being manipulated by the availability heuristic, and you can deliberately seek out the base rates to correct your intuitive judgment.
All right, before we wrap up, I want to subscribe to that. If you're listening right now and you're realizing that your brain has been doing this your whole life without you noticing, hit subscribe. We do this every single day. We decode one psychological phenomenon, make it make sense, and help you actually use it in your real life. New episodes daily.
And here's what I want to leave you with today. The next time you feel a spike of fear about something, whether it's a plane flight or a health scare story you saw online or some dramatic risk that's been in the news, I want you to pause and ask one simple question. Am I responding to the probability of this happening, or am I responding to the vividness of the examples in my mind? That single question can be the thread that leads you back to clearer thinking.
Data or drama? I'm going to remember that.
Data or drama? Zach, this has been another fascinating exploration of the human mind. Thank you for bringing your questions and your genuine curiosity.
Thank you for making me realize my brain is an ancient artifact doing its best in a modern world. I'll see you all tomorrow for another episode of Mind Decoded.
See you then.